In today's video, we're counting down 5 Karens who got eaten alive by animals. From a tourist who berated her guide moments before stepping into crocodile waters, to a hiker who mocked park rangers all the way into grizzly territory. But first, we begin in South Africa, where a woman's demand for the perfect photograph put her face to face with a predator that doesn't negotiate. It was June 17th, 2015, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across a private game reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province. The dry winter air carried the scent of dust and acacia as a safari vehicle idled on a dirt track, its passengers watching a pride of lions resting beneath a cluster of umbrella thorns some distance ahead. Diane Relford was a 49-year-old insurance claims supervisor from San Diego, California, whose co-workers had long described her as someone who treated every interaction as a negotiation she intended to win. She had spent 23 years in the same office, gradually ascending to a position where she could delegate unpleasant tasks and challenge decisions made above her pay grade. Former colleagues said she had a habit of escalating minor disagreements into formal complaints and had once threatened legal action against a coffee shop over a loyalty card dispute. Her vacation to South Africa was meant to celebrate her recent divorce settlement, a trip she had planned meticulously while demanding upgrades and substitutions at every opportunity. Fellow guests at the lodge had already witnessed 2 confrontations before the safari departed that afternoon. During the morning safety briefing, the head guide, a seasoned ranger named Willem, emphasized that guests must remain inside the vehicle at all times. He explained that lions viewed humans outside vehicles as prey or territorial threats, rather than the non-threatening observers they appeared to be when seated. Diane interrupted twice, once to complain about departure time, and again to question why they couldn't get closer than what Willem described as safe distances. The vehicle had stopped at an appropriate distance from the pride, and guests were quietly photographing when Diane began expressing displeasure. She complained loudly that the animals were too far for decent photographs and that she hadn't paid premium rates to squint at shapes in the distance. Willem reminded her calmly that approaching closer would endanger the group. Diane called him overcautious and suggested he was padding tour time to avoid actual work. Other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. African lions are apex predators, with females weighing between 265 and 395 pounds, and males exceeding 420 pounds. Lionesses are the primary hunters of a pride, capable of short bursts of speed that can close distance in seconds and coordinated takedowns of prey several times their size. Their killing method typically involves suffocation, clamping powerful jaws around the throat or muzzle to collapse the windpipe or cut off blood flow to the brain. Lions view humans outside vehicles as potential prey, their predatory instincts triggered by movement and vulnerability. A lion's claws can exceed 3 inches in length, and their jaws are powerful enough to crush and tear with minimal effort. As guests photographed, a lioness separated from the pride and moved into tall grass to the vehicle's right. Willem noticed and quietly instructed everyone to remain absolutely still. The lioness was hunting something, possibly a warthog in the brush, and her path would bring her within a few dozen yards of the vehicle. Diane seized the moment to stand, raising her camera above the metal frame to get an unobstructed shot. Willem ordered her to sit immediately. She waved him off without looking back. The lioness's head snapped toward the movement. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then she began moving toward the vehicle, her body low, shoulder blades rolling beneath tawny fur. Willem started the engine, but Diane remained standing, apparently believing she was getting exceptional footage. When the lioness broke into a sprint, covering the distance with terrifying speed, Willem shouted for everyone to hold on and attempted to reverse. Diane lost her balance as the vehicle lurched. She tumbled over the side rail, landing hard on packed dirt just a few feet from the vehicle. The lioness adjusted her trajectory instantly. Before Diane could rise, the animal was on her. The lioness struck Diane's upper body with her full weight, driving her onto her back. Jaws clamped around Diane's throat, crushing her windpipe and pinning her to the ground. Diane's hands came up reflexively, pushing at the lioness's muzzle, but her strength faded within seconds as her airway collapsed. Her legs kicked briefly, then went still. The lioness maintained her suffocating grip, holding Diane's throat for well over a minute as her body twitched and then went completely limp. Even after Diane's movements ceased, the lioness briefly applied pressure, ensuring the kill was complete. Only when Willem revved the engine and drove the vehicle directly toward her, shouting and honking aggressively, did the lioness release her grip. The disturbance caused her to retreat into the tall grass, abandoning the body. Emergency responders reached the site within minutes. Diane was found with catastrophic injuries to her neck and upper body. Officials determined the cause of death to be suffocation and massive blood loss caused by the lion's bite. The reserve concluded that safety protocols had been followed by staff, and that Diane's decision to stand and ignore direct instructions had precipitated the encounter. The lioness was not destroyed, as her behavior was deemed a natural predatory response. Fellow guests who witnessed the attack were offered counseling, and several cut their trips short. While Diane Relford's demands for a closer photograph ended in a lioness's jaws in South Africa, a woman in Australia's Northern Territory would soon discover that crocodile-infested waters show no deference to self-appointed experts. It was August 23, 2014, and the humid air hung heavy over the Adelaide River floodplain, about an hour outside Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. The water moved slowly, brown and opaque, lined with paper barks and pandanus palms that concealed the banks from easy view. Patricia Newland was a 44-year-old middle school vice principal from Melbourne who had built her professional reputation on enforcing rules for others while finding exceptions for herself. Colleagues described her as someone who demanded strict compliance from students and staff, but regularly bypassed protocols she found personally inconvenient. She had been written up twice by her superintendent for overstepping administrative boundaries, both times responding with grievances that dragged on for months. Her vacation to the top end was meant to be a wildlife photography expedition, a hobby she approached with aggressive certainty. She had booked a river cruise advertised as a crocodile viewing experience, joining a group of 11 other tourists on an aluminum vessel designed for safe observation. The boat was equipped with high rails and shaded seating, specifically configured to keep passengers away from the water's edge. The tour operator, a weathered local named Mick, delivered the mandatory safety briefing before departure, explaining that the Adelaide River system contained one of the highest concentrations of saltwater crocodiles in the world. He emphasized that passengers must remain seated and must never place hands or any body part near the water. Patricia challenged him immediately, questioning whether the warnings were legally required or simply theatrical. When Mick explained that multiple fatalities had occurred in territory waters, she dismissed the information as exaggerated local folklore. 20 minutes into the cruise, the boat stopped near a muddy bank where a large saltwater crocodile basked in the afternoon sun. Passengers photographed from their seats while Mick provided information about crocodile biology. Patricia complained that the angle was poor and the distance too great. She stood and moved to the stern, leaning over the low rail to get a shot without other passengers in her frame. Mick ordered her to sit down. She ignored him. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles, with males commonly exceeding 16 feet and occasionally reaching over 20 feet in length. Large males can weigh well over 1,000 pounds. They are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, capable of remaining motionless for hours while monitoring prey movement. Their bite is among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, strong enough to crush bone instantly, and their hunting strategy typically involves explosive acceleration from the water, clamping onto prey. Once a crocodile secures a grip, escape is nearly impossible. The crocodile on the bank had slipped into the water moments after the boat stopped, its movement so subtle that only Mick noticed. He began maneuvering the vessel away from the bank, but Patricia remained at the stern, bracing one hand on the rail and extending her camera toward the water's surface. Mick shouted at her a final time. The crocodile struck from directly beneath the stern. The water erupted as the animal launched vertically, its jaws closing around Patricia's right forearm and wrist with crushing force. The impact fractured her forearm immediately, bones splintering under pressure as the animal yanked her toward the water. Patricia's scream was cut short as the crocodile's weight pulled her over the rail and into the water head first. She disappeared beneath the surface almost immediately. The water churned violently as the crocodile initiated its death roll, spinning through the murky water amid clouds of blood and sediment. The rolling continued for several seconds, the crocodile's jaws maintaining their crushing grip on her arm as the violent rotation disoriented her and prevented any attempt to surface. The death roll caused catastrophic damage to her shoulder and upper arm, tearing muscle and ligament while driving her deeper underwater. Her body surfaced briefly, face down and motionless, before being dragged under again as the crocodile repositioned its grip and pulled her toward deeper water. Mick radioed emergency services immediately, providing GPS coordinates and a description of the attack. Rangers already conducting aerial patrols were diverted to the site, but there was nothing to recover. A search operation continued for 3 days. Patricia's remains were located 4 days after the attack, cached beneath a submerged log system downstream. Officials later said she drowned, with massive blood loss from the injuries. The tour operator was cleared of any liability, with investigators noting that Patricia had received multiple direct warnings and had deliberately violated explicit safety instructions. As the Adelaide River claimed another victim who believed warnings were meant for others, a woman in Kenya would step into the shallows of Lake Victoria, convinced that hippos were slow, docile creatures best photographed at close range. It was October 9, 2016, and the morning mist still clung to the shoreline of Lake Victoria near Kisumu, Kenya, where the water met tall papyrus reeds in a maze of channels and mudflats. The lake stretched to the horizon, deceptively calm, its surface broken occasionally by the rounded backs of hippopotamuses moving between deeper water and the shallows. Brenda Luckman was a 52-year-old real estate agent from Phoenix, Arizona, who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of getting what she wanted through sheer persistence and volume. Her adult children had declined to join her on this trip, citing previous travel experiences that had devolved into public arguments with hotel staff and tour guides. One of her daughters later told investigators that Brenda had a pattern of ignoring rules she considered inconvenient, believing her experience and judgment outweighed any posted warning. Brenda had described the trip to Friends as a bucket list adventure, though she had done minimal research and arrived with expectations shaped primarily by documentary footage and resort brochures. The lakeside camp where she was staying had clear protocols regarding wildlife interaction. A printed notice in each tent warned guests that hippos regularly moved through the camp at night, and that guests should never approach the water's edge alone. The camp manager, a Kenyan woman named Grace, personally briefed Brenda on the first evening, explaining that hippos are responsible for a huge number of fatal encounters across Africa and are notoriously territorial. Brenda listened with visible impatience, interrupting twice to ask when breakfast would be served. On her second morning, Brenda woke before dawn and decided to photograph the sunrise over the lake. She ignored the protocol requiring guests to request an escort and walked alone toward the shoreline. When a groundskeeper spotted her and called out a warning, she waved dismissively and continued walking. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for hundreds of human deaths in some estimates. Despite their rotund appearance, they are remarkably fast and agile, capable of running at speeds approaching 20 miles per hour on land and moving through water with powerful efficiency. Adult males can weigh over 4,000 pounds, and their jaws can open to nearly 180 degrees, revealing canine teeth that can exceed 16 inches in length. These teeth are not designed for eating. Hippos are herbivores, but for combat, and they can sever limbs, crush skulls, and inflict fatal wounds with a single bite. Hippos are highly territorial in water and perceive any intrusion as a threat. Brenda had waded approximately 15 feet from shore when the water in front of her suddenly bulged upward. A massive bull hippo surfaced with explosive force, water cascading off its barrel-shaped body as it lunged toward her. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, the pink interior and yellowed tusks clearly visible. Brenda stumbled backward, but lost her footing in the soft mud. She fell onto her back in the shallows as the hippo closed the distance. The animal's jaws slammed shut around Brenda's midsection, the lower tusks punching through her back, while the upper teeth crushed into her chest and abdomen. The bite force compressed her torso catastrophically, fracturing her spine and shattering multiple ribs. The hippo shook its massive head violently from side to side, the motion tearing through internal organs and opening massive wounds. Blood erupted from Brenda's mouth as her lungs collapsed under the crushing pressure. The hippo released its grip and immediately lunged forward again, driving its enormous weight down onto Brenda's body. The impact forced her underwater as over 2 tons of muscle and bone crushed her into the muddy lake bottom. The animal's tusks gored into her left thigh and hip during the assault, tearing through the femoral artery in a spray of blood that clouded the shallow water red. The hippo charged forward once more, trampling Brenda's motionless form as it moved into deeper water. Groundskeepers who had run toward the shoreline watched helplessly as the massive animal withdrew. Brenda's body was recovered approximately 2 hours later. Her injuries were so extensive that identification required documentation from her passport. The cause of death was determined to be massive hemorrhage and traumatic asphyxiation, secondary to crushing bite injuries and trampling. The camp reinforced its escort protocols and installed additional fencing near the waterline. While Brenda Luckman's sunrise photography session ended in the jaws of a territorial hippo, a woman in Montana would soon dismiss every warning about grizzly bears as overblown government fear-mongering. It was July 28, 2017, and the morning sun filtered through lodgepole pines along a backcountry trail in Montana's Glacier National Park, where the air smelled of pine needles and distant snowmelt. The trail wound through prime grizzly habitat, dense timber interspersed with berry-rich clearings, and the Park Service had posted fresh warnings at every trailhead following multiple bear sightings in the preceding week. Karen Whitmore was a 47-year-old dental office manager from suburban Denver who had planned this hiking trip as a personal challenge, a way to prove to herself and others that she could handle wilderness conditions without what she called the excessive hand-holding promoted by government agencies. She had posted extensively on social media in the weeks before the trip, mocking national park regulations and insisting that bear danger was statistically negligible. She had purchased bear spray at a sporting goods store, but had never practiced using it. At the trailhead that morning, Karen encountered a park ranger conducting routine hiker contacts. The ranger informed her that a sow grizzly with 2 cubs had been sighted repeatedly along the trail she intended to hike and recommended she choose an alternate route or wait to join a larger group. Karen responded with hostility, accusing the ranger of trying to control where people could walk on public land. She set off alone, declining the offered bear safety pamphlet. The trail climbed steadily through timber before opening into a meadow thick with huckleberry bushes. Karen stopped multiple times to photograph wildflowers and distant peaks, apparently unconcerned about making noise or remaining alert. 2 separate hiking parties passed her going the opposite direction, both warning her about a fresh bear sign ahead. She thanked neither group and continued forward. Approximately 3 miles from the trailhead, the trail narrowed and curved around a dense thicket of willows bordering a small creek. Karen was moving quickly, eyes on her phone as she checked the GPS, when she rounded the curve and found herself less than 40 feet from a female grizzly and 2 yearling cubs. The sow was standing on her hind legs, testing the air, and the cubs were behind her in the brush. Karen froze. Grizzly bears in the northern Rockies typically weigh between 400 and 800 pounds, with females averaging toward the lower end of that range. Despite their bulk, they can sprint at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour and cover short distances faster than any human can react. Grizzlies are not typically predatory toward humans, but sows with cubs are extraordinarily defensive and account for the majority of fatal maulings in North America. The bear's claws, which can exceed 4 inches in length, while its bite force can crush bone and sever limbs. Defensive attacks are typically brief but catastrophic. The sow dropped to all fours and charged without a bluff display. Karen turned to run, the worst possible response, and managed perhaps 3 strides before the bear overtook her. The impact struck her from behind, the bear's weight driving her face first into the rocky trail. Karen's nose and several teeth were shattered on contact with the ground. Before she could rise, the sow was on top of her. The bear's front paw came down on Karen's upper back with crushing force, claws raking deep furrows from her shoulder blade to her spine. Karen screamed as the sow bit down on her left shoulder and upper arm, shaking violently before releasing. The bear struck again with her paw, this time catching Karen across the side of her head and face, the blow fracturing her cheekbone and jaw. The claws opened her scalp in several places, blood pouring down her face and neck. The sow repositioned and bit into Karen's upper back, jaws clamping down on muscle and bone with enough force to crack ribs. She shook her massive head, tearing tissue and opening wounds that immediately began bleeding heavily. The bear's weight pressed down on Karen's torso, compressing her chest and making it nearly impossible to breathe. Karen's attempts to protect herself grew weaker as shock and blood loss took hold. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but inflicted catastrophic damage. The sow delivered multiple crushing bites to Karen's back and shoulders, while her claws tore through clothing and flesh across Karen's ribcage, arms, and the back of her head. When Karen's body went limp and her screaming stopped, the sow stepped back, huffing loudly. She stood over Karen briefly, then moved away toward her cubs and disappeared into the timber. A hiking party found her later that morning. They initially attempted to check for signs of life, but retreated when they noticed fresh bear scat nearby. Rangers reached the area using a helicopter. Karen was pronounced dead at the scene. Officials documented massive soft tissue destruction to the back, shoulders, and scalp, multiple rib fractures, severe facial trauma, and fatal blood loss consistent with a defensive grizzly bear mauling. The sow and cubs were not destroyed, as the attack was deemed a natural defensive response to sudden close contact. As Karen Whitmore's dismissal of ranger warnings ended beneath a grizzly's weight in Montana, a woman in the Bahamas would soon learn that sharks do not distinguish between confidence and carelessness. It was April 14, 2018, and the turquoise water off the western shore of New Providence Island shimmered under a cloudless Caribbean sky. The dive boat had anchored a few miles offshore, where the sandy bottom dropped away into deeper blue, and the water column teemed with reef fish, sea turtles, and the sleek gray shapes that had made this site famous. Melissa Thornburg was a 39-year-old pharmaceutical sales representative from Atlanta who had built her career on aggressive persistence and her personal life on the assumption that her judgment was superior to most. She had arrived in the Bahamas for a week of diving, specifically seeking out operators who offered shark encounters. Her dive certification was basic, an open water card earned 5 years earlier, but she had informed the boat crew that she was essentially an expert, having completed over 20 dives in various locations. The crew noted that she had questioned their equipment choices, criticized the boat's departure time, and loudly complained about the presence of novice divers in her group. The dive operator specialized in controlled shark feeding experiences, a controversial but legal practice in Bahamian waters. The dive master, a Bahamian woman named Keisha, explained that Caribbean reef sharks would be attracted to the site using bait contained in a secured metal crate. Divers would remain in a designated observation area marked by weighted ropes, a short distance from the feeding zone. Under no circumstances were divers to approach the bait crate, touch the sharks, or leave the observation area. Keisha emphasized that while reef sharks were not typically aggressive toward humans, they became highly competitive and unpredictable during feeding and could mistake human hands for food in the chaos. Melissa interrupted several times during the briefing, asking why divers couldn't get closer for better photographs and suggesting that the safety perimeter was excessive. Caribbean reef sharks typically reach lengths of 8 to 10 feet and weigh between 150 and 250 pounds. While not considered among the most dangerous shark species, they are responsible for numerous documented attacks on humans, particularly in situations involving food competition. During feeding events, sharks enter a state of heightened arousal, their sensory systems overwhelmed by blood, vibration, and the erratic movements of prey. In this state, they may bite reflexively at any object that enters their sensory field. Their teeth, while smaller than those of great whites, are serrated and designed for cutting, capable of severing fingers and causing deep lacerations with minimal effort. The dive proceeded normally at first. A cluster of Caribbean reef sharks, ranging from 5 to 8 feet in length, circled the bait crate as divers watched from the observation line. Melissa had positioned herself at the edge of the group, her camera housing extended toward the sharks, frequently drifting forward until Keisha signaled her back. As the feeding reached its peak, with sharks darting through clouds of dispersed bait and fish fragments, Melissa pushed off the bottom and swam directly toward the crate, leaving the observation area entirely. Melissa had reached the bait crate and was attempting to photograph a shark feeding directly from the metal mesh when a large female turned sharply and collided with her extended arm. The shark's jaws closed around Melissa's right forearm just below the elbow, the serrated teeth cutting deep into tissue and grinding against bone. Melissa jerked backward reflexively, tearing her arm free but opening massive lacerations that immediately began pouring blood into the water. The cloud of blood spreading through the feeding zone changed everything. Sharks that had been focused on the bait crate began turning toward the new source. A second shark swept past Melissa's injured arm, its rough skin abrading the wound further before it circled back. Melissa's thrashing movements and the electrical signals from her panicked muscle contractions drew more attention. She reached for her regulator, which had been knocked askew, gulping seawater as she struggled to reorient it. A 6-foot male struck her right thigh from below, its teeth tearing through the wetsuit and removing a chunk of muscle. Melissa's scream released a stream of bubbles as pain overwhelmed her ability to think clearly. She kicked frantically, the motion only attracting more interest. Another shark bumped her hard from the side, testing whether she was prey, before sweeping in and taking an investigatory bite. The water around her turned opaque with blood and disturbed sediment as she continued to thrash. Keisha and another dive master were already moving toward her, using metal poles and hard camera housings to push sharks away and create space. They reached Melissa within seconds, forming a protective barrier as they grabbed her BC and began pulling her away from the feeding zone. The sharks continued circling, but did not press the attack once the dive masters established a defensive perimeter. By the time they pulled Melissa clear of the immediate danger, she had sustained severe bite wounds to her right forearm, right thigh, and left calf. The crew initiated emergency ascent procedures and attempted resuscitation once on the surface. A marine emergency helicopter was dispatched from Nassau and arrived within 30 minutes. Her right arm was badly damaged, with deep lacerations exposing muscle and bone. She was barely conscious and had aspirated significant seawater during the chaos. Melissa was airlifted to a hospital, but she died during transport. Officials determined the cause of death was massive blood loss from multiple shark bites, with drowning listed as a contributing factor. The dive operator's license was temporarily suspended pending investigation, though final findings concluded that Melissa had deliberately violated safety protocols by leaving the observation area and approaching the active feeding zone. No action was taken against the business beyond a requirement for enhanced briefing documentation. From South Africa to the Bahamas, 5 warnings were ignored, and 5 people paid the ultimate price for believing the rules didn't apply to them. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.